Why is that black kid touching the registration table? Call security. The words echoed through the marble hall. Conversation stopped. Laughter followed. Dozens of professors turned at once. Men and women who had built careers tearing down ideas, now staring at one small boy standing alone with a worn backpack and trembling hands. "I'm here to compete," he said. The laughter grew louder. A professor leaned forward, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Compete," he scoffed. "This isn't a place for charity cases." The boy swallowed, then lifted his chin. "I qualified with the highest score." That's when the room broke, because to them, this wasn't confidence. It was audacity. What none of them knew, what they were about to learn the hard way, was that the child they were laughing at had already solved the problem that had defeated them for decades. Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated or laughed at, hit like and subscribe. This story is for you, and you won't believe how it ends. Elijah Carter sat in the back corner of room 14, where the ceiling leaked when it rained and the textbooks were older than most of the teachers. His desk was scratched with initials from students long graduated, and his pencil was worn down to a stub he'd sharpened 6 times already that week. Mrs. Patterson was explaining fractions to the class for the 3rd day in a row. Elijah wasn't listening. He was 3 chapters ahead in the textbook, working through problems that wouldn't appear on any test she'd give. His notebook was filled with numbers that spiraled into patterns, equations that branched like trees, questions he asked himself because no one else would understand them. "Elijah?" Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through his concentration. "Are you with us?" He looked up. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward him. "Yes, ma'am." "Then perhaps you can tell the class what 3/5 plus 2/5 equals?" He blinked. 1. Someone snickered. Mrs. Patterson smiled, but it was the kind of smile adults used when they were relieved you weren't failing. "Good. Stay focused." She moved on, and Elijah returned to his notebook. The problem he was working on had nothing to do with fractions. It was something he'd found buried in an old library book, a puzzle about numbers that behaved strangely, that seemed to follow no pattern until you looked at them from the right angle. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father had left before Elijah's 5th birthday. They lived in a neighborhood where gunshots punctuated summer nights, and the corner store had bulletproof glass. College felt like a distant country, not a destination. But Numbers didn't care about any of that. Numbers didn't see his second-hand clothes, or his free lunch card, or the zip code that made people look away. Numbers were honest. They either worked or they didn't. And when Elijah solved a problem, when he found the answer hidden inside the chaos, he felt something he couldn't name, like discovering a secret door in a room everyone else thought was empty. After school, he walked 3 blocks to the public library. It was the only place in the neighborhood with air conditioning that didn't require buying something. The librarian, Ms. Chen, knew him by name. "Back again?" she asked as he pushed through the glass doors. "Yes, ma'am." "Same table?" "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. Ms. Chen never asked why a 12-year-old spent every afternoon surrounded by advanced mathematics texts. She just made sure the books were waiting for him. Elijah sat at the table in the far corner, beneath the window where afternoon light slanted through. He opened his notebook and continued where he'd left off that morning. The problem was called the Rasmussen conjecture, a question about prime number distribution that had stumped professional mathematicians for 32 years. He'd stumbled across it by accident 2 months ago, in a book that was supposed to be about basic algebra. There was a single paragraph mentioning unsolved problems, and the Rasmussen conjecture was listed among them. Elijah had read the description 3 times, then pulled every mathematics book the library had. Most were too advanced. Some he could barely understand. But slowly, piece by piece, he began to see something. A pattern. A structure. The kind of thing that might be obvious once someone pointed it out, but invisible until they did. He'd filled 4 notebooks already. His mother thought he was doing homework. His teachers thought he was a good student who didn't cause trouble. No one knew that Elijah Carter, 12 years old, living in a neighborhood marked red on development maps, had discovered something that might be the answer to a problem that had defeated some of the brightest minds in mathematics. He didn't tell anyone because he wasn't sure yet, and because deep down, he suspected no one would believe him anyway. The Rasmussen conjecture was first proposed in 1991 by Dr. Henrik Rasmussen, a Danish mathematician working at the Institute for Advanced Study. The problem was deceptively simple to state but impossibly difficult to prove. It concerned the distribution of prime numbers, those strange integers divisible only by themselves and 1. Primes seemed random, appearing without predictable pattern as numbers grew larger. But Rasmussen believed there was a hidden structure, a formula that would predict where clusters of primes would appear within specific ranges. If proven, the conjecture would revolutionize cryptography, computer science, and number theory itself. Hundreds of mathematicians had attempted solutions over 3 decades. All had failed. Some came close. Dr. Patricia Voss at MIT developed an approach in 1998 that worked for small numbers, but collapsed when tested at scale. Professor James Chen at Cambridge published a proof in 2003 that was demolished by peer review within 6 months, a humiliation that ended his career. The problem became legendary not just for its difficulty, but for the wreckage it left behind. Academic reputations were built trying to solve it, then destroyed when the solutions failed. Tenure committees rejected candidates who'd spent too long pursuing it. Graduate students were warned away from it like sailors avoiding cursed waters. Yet the conjecture remained open, unsolved, taunting. Every few years, someone would claim they'd cracked it. Every time, the mathematics community would gather with equal parts hope and skepticism. And every time, the proof would crumble under scrutiny. Dr. Richard Hartwell, chair of mathematics at Princeton, had spent 17 years working on the Rasmussen conjecture. He'd published 4 papers on approaches that yielded partial results, enough to maintain his reputation as a serious scholar, but never the complete proof. His office walls were covered with equations, each one a dead end he'd mapped with meticulous detail. Hartwell was 59 years old. He'd won awards, mentored dozens of graduate students, and served on committees that determined the future of mathematical research in America. The Rasmussen conjecture was his obsession, his life's work, the problem he dreamed about when he couldn't sleep. He was not alone. Across the world, in universities from Tokyo to London to Sao Paulo, mathematicians had devoted years to this single question. Conferences were organized around it. Journals published special issues analyzing why every attempted solution had failed. The problem had become bigger than mathematics. It had become a symbol of the limits of human intelligence, of the mysteries that refused to yield, of the humility required to face questions that might have no answers. And into this world of genius, ego, and decades of failure, a 12-year-old boy from an underfunded school was about to step with 4 notebooks and a solution. Elijah's breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in October. He'd been circling the same section of the proof for 2 weeks, knowing something was missing, but unable to see what. The library had closed hours ago, but he'd convinced Ms. Chen to let him stay late, promising he'd lock the back door when he left. The building was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. His notebook was open to page 47, where he'd written out the sequence that seemed to hold the key. Prime clusters appeared in patterns when viewed through a specific modular lens. He'd discovered that much. But the formula that described those patterns kept breaking down at higher magnitudes. He'd tried 17 different approaches, 17 failures. Elijah rubbed his eyes. The clock on the wall read 11:43 p.m. His mother would be home from her shift at the hospital soon, expecting to find him asleep. But he couldn't stop now. Not when he was this close. He flipped back through his previous work, scanning equations he'd written weeks ago. Sometimes the answer wasn't in moving forward. It was in understanding what you'd already found. Then he saw it. A small notation in the margin of page 19. Something he'd dismissed as trivial when he'd first written it. A relationship between certain prime gaps that seemed interesting, but irrelevant to the main proof. Elijah's hand froze. What if it wasn't irrelevant? What if that relationship was the foundation, and everything he'd been building was backwards? He grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and started writing. The equation flowed differently this time, structured around the gap relationship, instead of forcing the gaps to fit into a predetermined structure. The algebra aligned. The modular arithmetic worked. The sequence held at higher magnitudes. His heart was pounding. He checked it again, then again, then a 4th time, working through the proof from 3 different angles, searching for the flaw that would destroy everything. The flaw didn't come. At 2:17 a.m., Elijah Carter leaned back in his chair and stared at the pages spread across the library table. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurred from hours of focus. He'd done it. The proof was complete. The Rasmussen conjecture, the problem that had defeated professional mathematicians for 32 years, was solved. In his handwriting, in a public library, in a neighborhood most professors would never visit, by a 12-year-old who wasn't supposed to be capable of this kind of thinking. Elijah knew what would happen if he told anyone. He'd seen it before, in smaller ways. When he'd corrected Mrs. Patterson's mistake on the board, she'd smiled tightly and changed the subject. When he'd asked Mr. Rodriguez about advanced topics, the teacher had suggested he focus on passing the standardized test instead. When his guidance counselor reviewed his grades, she'd praised his work ethic, but mentioned nothing about accelerated programs or gifted tracks. The system wasn't built to recognize brilliance in boys like him. It was built to manage them, contain them, keep them moving through the proper channels. But the proof was real. The mathematics didn't lie. And somewhere in the world, there had to be someone who would look at the work itself instead of the child who'd created it. Elijah carefully photographed each page with the library's scanner, saved the files to a flash drive Ms. Chen had given him, and packed his notebooks into his backpack. He walked home through empty streets, past chain-link fences and boarded windows, carrying the answer to a question that had obsessed some of the smartest people alive. No one noticed. No one knew. Not yet. The National Youth Mathematics Invitational was the most prestigious academic competition for students under 18. Held annually at Princeton University, it drew the brightest young minds from elite prep schools, specialized academies, and families wealthy enough to afford private tutors who trained students specifically for this event. Elijah learned about it from a poster in the library. The poster was faded, probably left over from the previous year, but the website was still active. Registration closed in 3 days. Qualifying required submitting solutions to 5 advanced problems, each designed to test the kind of mathematical sophistication typically found in college juniors or graduate students. Elijah read through the problems twice. He could solve all 5. The registration fee was $75. He didn't have $75. His mother kept emergency money in an envelope in the kitchen drawer, money that was supposed to cover unexpected bills, broken appliances, the gap between paychecks. Elijah had never touched it. He stood in the kitchen for 20 minutes, staring at the drawer, trying to convince himself that this didn't count as an emergency. But it did. It had to. He took the money, left a note promising to pay it back, and registered online at 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes before the deadline. The qualifying round required written solutions submitted via email. Elijah worked through each problem methodically, showing every step, explaining his reasoning. For the 5th problem, the hardest one, which involved proving a complex relationship in algebraic topology, he included 3 different approaches because he'd found 3 different ways to reach the same answer. He submitted everything at 4:47 a.m. and fell asleep at the library table. 6 weeks later, an email arrived. Subject: NYMI qualification results. Elijah's hands shook as he opened it. Dear Elijah Carter, congratulations. You have qualified for the National Youth Mathematics Invitational with a perfect score. Your solutions demonstrated exceptional clarity and insight. We look forward to welcoming you to Princeton University for the final competition on November 18th. Please review the attached information regarding travel, accommodation, and competition procedures. Perfect score. Elijah read the sentence 5 times. There was more. A second paragraph that made his breath catch. Your solution to question 5 has been reviewed by our senior advisory board. The approach you presented is novel, and if we understand correctly, may have broader implications than the problem itself. We encourage you to discuss this with our faculty during the competition weekend. He printed the email and carried it home like a fragile treasure. His mother cried when he showed her. Not sad tears. Overwhelmed tears, proud tears, the kind that said she'd always known her son was special, but never imagined the world would notice. They couldn't afford the flight to New Jersey, but Ms. Chen helped him find a youth travel grant, and his principal, who'd barely known Elijah's name before, suddenly became very interested in making sure the school's star student had transportation. 2 weeks before the competition, Elijah did something he'd been avoiding. He included a brief note with his registration confirmation, addressed to the Faculty Advisory Board. I believe I've solved the Rasmussen conjecture. I can present the proof during the competition if there's interest. He almost deleted it a dozen times before finally clicking send. The response came from Dr. Richard Hartwell himself. Mr. Carter, the Rasmussen conjecture has been attempted by numerous professional mathematicians over 3 decades. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, we strongly advise focusing your energy on the competition itself. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and this particular problem has proven resistant to even the most sophisticated approaches. We look forward to meeting you in November. Elijah read between the lines clearly enough. Don't embarrass yourself, kid. He printed that email too, folded it carefully, and tucked it into the notebook that contained his proof. Princeton's mathematics building looked like a cathedral built to worship numbers. Stone archways, polished floors, walls lined with portraits of men who'd changed the world with equations. Elijah stood on the front steps with his backpack and his mother's borrowed suitcase, feeling like he'd stepped through a portal into someone else's life. Inside, the registration hall hummed with controlled chaos. Students clustered in groups, comparing credentials and prep school pedigrees. Parents networked with faculty members, discussing research opportunities and summer programs. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, connected through a web of institutions and social circles that had never included anyone from Elijah's world. He approached the registration table alone. His mother had wanted to come inside, but the flight had been expensive enough. She was staying at a budget hotel 40 minutes away, and they'd agreed to meet after the opening ceremony. Elijah wore his best clothes, khakis that were slightly too short and a button-down shirt his mother had ironed 3 times. The woman behind the table was typing on a laptop, barely glancing up as students approached. "Name?" she asked when Elijah reached the front. "Elijah Carter." Her fingers paused. She looked up, then past him, as if expecting someone else. "Are you here with a school group?" "No, ma'am, just me." Her expression shifted. Not hostile, but confused. The kind of look people gave when something didn't match their expectations. "Let me find your packet." She sorted through folders while Elijah waited. Behind him, he heard whispers. "Who's that? Is he lost? Maybe he's someone's brother?" Then the voice that would echo through everything that followed. "Why is that black kid touching the registration table? Call security." The words came from a man in his 60s, wearing a Princeton faculty badge and holding a coffee cup. He wasn't shouting. His tone was casual, matter-of-fact, the voice of someone who genuinely believed he was identifying a problem that needed solving. The hall went silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Parents pulled their children slightly closer, an instinctive movement that said, "Stay back, something's wrong." Elijah felt every eye in the room lock onto him. The woman at the registration table looked stricken. "Dr. Hartwell, he's a registered participant." Dr. Richard Hartwell stepped closer, frowning. "Registered? For the competition?" "Yes, sir, Elijah Carter. Perfect qualifying score." Hartwell's frown deepened. He studied Elijah with the expression of someone examining an equation that couldn't possibly be correct but somehow had passed every preliminary check. "You're Elijah Carter?" "Yes, sir." "The student who claims to have solved the Rasmussen conjecture?" Someone laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief that broke the tension, or made it worse. Elijah's throat went dry. "I don't claim, sir. I did." That's when the laughter spread. Not cruel laughter, exactly. More like the sound people make when someone says something so absurd that cruelty isn't even necessary. The laughter of professors who'd spent decades studying mathematics, watching a child announce he'd solved what they couldn't. A younger professor leaned toward a colleague. Perfect score in qualifiers, but apparently doesn't understand the difference between solving classroom problems and proving a major conjecture. Someone should have screened him better. I'm sure he's very talented for his circumstances. Elijah's hands trembled. He kept them at his sides, refusing to let anyone see. Hartwell's expression had shifted from confusion to something harder. "Mr. Carter, the Rasmussen conjecture is not a problem for hobbyists or self-study. It requires deep knowledge of advanced number theory, familiarity with decades of failed approaches, and mathematical maturity that takes years to develop." "I have the proof." Elijah said quietly. In my notebook. I am sure you believe that, but what you likely have is a common misunderstanding of the problem's requirements, or an error in reasoning that seems correct until examined by experts. This happens frequently with bright students who encounter problems beyond their preparation. Another professor joined the growing circle. The competition is challenging enough without distractions. Perhaps we could arrange a separate meeting to review the boys' work. After the event concludes. Translation. Let's humor him later and focus on the real competitors now. Elijah felt something crack inside his chest. Not anger, not yet. Something closer to recognition. The understanding that no matter what he'd discovered, no matter what he could prove, these people had already decided who he was allowed to be. Hartwell glanced at his watch. Registration closes in 10 minutes. Mr. Carter, you're welcome to participate in the competition, but I'd suggest focusing on the actual challenges ahead rather than extracurricular claims. He turned away, dismissing Elijah as cleanly as erasing a wrong answer from a board. The registration woman handed over a folder with Elijah's name on it, her eyes apologetic, but her silence complete. Elijah took the folder and walked toward the seating area where competitors were gathering. Behind him, conversations resumed, energy returned. The disruption smoothed over as if he'd never spoken. But he had spoken, and he would speak again. The competition structure was elegant in its brutality. 3 rounds over 2 days. Each round eliminated half the remaining competitors. The problems increased in difficulty with each stage, designed to separate genuine mathematical talent from students who'd simply memorized techniques and practiced extensively. Round 1 began at 9 a.m. in a lecture hall filled with 72 competitors. Elijah sat near the back, alone. Other students clustered with friends from prep schools or summer programs, sharing nervous jokes and last-minute encouragement. No one sat near him. I might as well have been invisible except for the occasional glance that suggested people still couldn't quite believe he was there. The proctor distributed problem packets face down. You have 2 hours. Show all work. Partial credit will be awarded for correct approaches even if you don't reach a final answer. Begin. Papers flipped. Pencils moved. The room filled with the scratch of graphite and the occasional frustrated sigh. Elijah read through all 5 problems before starting. 3 were difficult, but straightforward. The kind of questions that rewarded careful calculation and familiarity with standard techniques. The 4th required insight into geometric relationships that weren't immediately obvious. The 5th was deliberately nasty, designed to trap students who rushed. He started with the 5th problem, not because it was easiest, but because he saw the trap and understood that avoiding it was the actual test. The problem presented a complex equation that seemed to require pages of algebraic manipulation. But if you recognized the underlying structure, if you saw that it was really just a disguised version of a much simpler relationship, you could solve it in half a page. Elijah wrote out his solution in 12 lines. Then he moved to the 4th problem, the geometric one. The standard approach involved coordinate geometry and heavy calculation. But Elijah noticed something else, asymmetry in the figure that meant you could solve it using pure reasoning. Barely any calculation at all. He sketched the key insight in his notebook, then wrote out the proof. 2 problems down, 90 minutes remaining. He worked through the remaining 3 methodically, checking each answer twice. Then he returned to the 4th problem and added a note at the bottom. Alternative approach. The answer can also be derived using vector field analysis. which reveals why this particular configuration is unique. The solution extends to higher dimensions. It was showing off, maybe, but it was also true. At 11 a.m., Elijah walked his completed packet to the front desk. The proctor looked surprised. "You're finished?" "Yes, sir." "You're aware that leaving early means you can't return if you want to revise your work?" "Yes, sir." She accepted his packet, noting his name and finish time. As Elijah walked toward the exit, he felt eyes following him. Whispers rippled through the room. He gave up. Probably couldn't handle the pressure. 2 hours and he finished in 90 minutes? No way he got more than 2 problems. Elijah pushed through the doors and stepped into the November air. He hadn't given up. He'd just finished. The results were posted at 6 p.m. 36 names advanced to round 2. Elijah's name was third on the list. More shocking was the note beside several competitors' scores. "See faculty for discussion." Elijah's entry had the note. So did 5 others, all students from elite programs with recognized mentors. The discussion sessions were held in private offices. Elijah waited on a bench outside Professor Hartwell's door, watching other students emerge from their meetings looking proud or frustrated. When his turn came, Hartwell gestured him inside without smiling. "Mr. Carter, sit." The office was exactly what Elijah had imagined. Books floor to ceiling, chalkboard covered in equations. The accumulated weight of decades spent pursuing truth through abstraction. Hartwell had Elijah's test packet open on his desk. "Your solutions are correct," he said. It sounded like an accusation. "But your methods are unconventional." "They work, sir." "That's not the point. Mathematics isn't just about reaching an answer. It's about demonstrating understanding through recognized approaches. Your solution to problem 4 bypasses the standard coordinate geometry entirely. Because there's a faster way. Perhaps, but in doing so, you skip steps that demonstrate foundational knowledge. A student who takes shortcuts might be lucky, or might be concealing gaps in understanding. Elijah met his eyes, or might understand the foundations well enough to recognize when they're unnecessary. Hartwell's expression hardened. "You're talented, Mr. Carter. No one disputes that. But talent without discipline becomes arrogance. I'm telling you this because tomorrow's round will be significantly harder. Clever tricks won't be enough." "They're not tricks, sir. They're insights." "Then prove it tomorrow." Hartwell stood, indicating the meeting was over. Elijah left the office understanding exactly what had just happened. He'd done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Because the problem wasn't his mathematics. The problem was that he'd solved things in ways they didn't expect, using methods they hadn't taught him, demonstrating a kind of understanding that didn't fit their categories. He was supposed to be good, but not that good, and certainly not in his own way. Round 2 eliminated all but 12 competitors. Elijah advanced again, this time ranked second overall. The problems had been brutally difficult, questions that required not just knowledge but creativity, the ability to see connections across different areas of mathematics. He'd loved every minute of it. The other competitors no longer ignored him. They watched him now, trying to figure out who this kid was and where he'd come from. A few attempted friendly conversation. Most kept their distance, as if proximity to someone so unexpected might be contagious. The final round would take place the next morning. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He lay in the hotel bed, a room the competition had provided for finalists, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the 12 notebooks sitting in his backpack. The proof. The thing that had brought him here, that mattered more than any competition. He still hadn't shown it to anyone. Tomorrow, after the final round, he would find a way. He'd request a meeting, present his work properly, let the mathematics speak for itself. That was the plan. What Elijah didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that 3 floors above him, in a conference room with locked doors, 6 faculty members were having a very different conversation. "We need to address the Carter situation," Professor Hartwell said. The others nodded. They'd all reviewed Elijah's work now, all seen the unconventional solutions, the approaches that worked despite violating the expected framework. Dr. Patricia Voss spoke carefully. "He's legitimately talented. The solutions are correct." "Correct, yes, but consider the optics." This from Dr. James Whitmore, Chair of Undergraduate Studies. A 12-year-old from an unknown school, defeating students from Andover, Exeter, the best programs in the country, and then claiming to have solved Rasmussen? "You think he'll present the supposed proof tomorrow?" another professor asked. "Almost certainly, during the finalist reception or immediately after. He'll want maximum attention." Hartwell leaned back in his chair. "We all know what happens when ambitious students make premature claims. The media attention, the disruption to serious research, the inevitable disappointment when peer review reveals the flaws." "So what are you suggesting?" A pause. Then Hartwell spoke words that would change everything. "Tomorrow's final problem. We change it." Silence. "Change it to what?" Voss asked quietly. "To something genuinely impossible. Not just difficult. Impossible. A problem with no solution, or one that requires tools he couldn't possibly have mastered. We frame it as testing ability to recognize mathematical dead ends, to demonstrate wisdom alongside skill. That's not what we've done in previous years. Previous years didn't have this situation. Look, we're not trying to destroy the boy. We are protecting him and the field from embarrassment. He performs respectably, finishes somewhere in the middle, gets valuable feedback, returns home with pride intact. Meanwhile, the winners are students with proper preparation and mentorship. Natural order is maintained." Whitmore nodded slowly. "And if he objects?" "He won't know the problem was different until afterward. By then, the competition is over, rankings are final, and we can address any concerns privately." Another professor shifted uncomfortably. "This seems necessary," Hartwell finished. "This is necessary." The vote was 5-1 in favor. Only Dr. Voss abstained, and she said nothing as the others discussed which impossible problem to select. They chose a variation of the Rasmussen conjecture itself. The irony escaped no one. The final round began at 9 a.m. 12 competitors sat in a smaller room, arranged at individual desks with partitions between them. The atmosphere felt different, heavier. This was the culmination of 2 days of brilliance and pressure. The moment that would define who stood at the top. The proctor entered, carrying sealed envelopes. "This final challenge is different from previous rounds," she announced. "You'll have 4 hours to work on a single problem. This problem has been designed to test not just your technical ability, but your mathematical judgment and reasoning about what approaches are viable." She distributed the envelopes. "You may begin." Elijah tore open his envelope and read the problem statement, then read it again. His hands went cold. The problem was a variant of the Rasmussen conjecture. Specifically, it asked for a proof of a relationship that was implied by his own solution. If the conjecture was true, this relationship necessarily followed, but proving the relationship independently without assuming the conjecture, would require… Wait. Elijah stared at the page. This was exactly what his notebooks contained. The relationship they were asking about was literally step 7 in his proof, the foundation that made everything else work. Had they known? Had someone actually read his work and designed this problem around it? Or was this just extraordinary coincidence? Either way, he could solve it. Right now. In the next 30 minutes, he could write out a complete, correct proof that would answer this question definitively. But something felt wrong. Elijah looked around the room. Other competitors were already working, pencils moving. They were approaching the problem the standard way, trying to build up from known theorems and established techniques. None of them looked confident, because the problem, approached standardly, was impossible. Or at least impossibly difficult. The kind of thing that should require years of focused work, not 4 hours in a competition setting. The realization hit him like cold water. They expected everyone to fail. They'd designed this to be unsolvable, to test whether students knew when to give up, when to admit that some problems were beyond current reach. If Elijah solved it, completely, correctly, in the first hour, what would that prove? Either that he was so brilliant, he could do in 60 minutes what professionals couldn't do in decades. Or that he'd somehow known the problem in advance, that he'd cheated. They'd built the perfect trap. If he failed like everyone else, he'd blend in. Respectable performance, good effort, go home and keep developing. If he succeeded, he'd be accused of the impossible, which meant accused of being impossible, which meant accused of fraud. Elijah sat frozen, pencil hovering above blank paper. 30 minutes passed. 60. Around him, competitors were filling pages with attempts, calculations, desperate approaches that went nowhere. The scratch of pencils sounded like static, nervous energy filling the room. Elijah had written nothing. His mind was paralyzed by the choice: hide what he knew, or prove what he could do and accept whatever came after. 2 hours gone. His paper was still blank. Then a memory surfaced. Not of mathematics, but of his mother. A conversation from years ago, when he'd asked why she worked so hard, why she never seemed to rest. Because, she'd said, someone's got to show them we belong here too. Not just survive. Belong. Elijah picked up his pencil. He didn't write the proof from his notebooks, not exactly. Instead, he wrote a different version. One that reached the same conclusion, but through a slightly different path, as if discovering the result for the first time, rather than applying a solution he'd already found. He made it look like work instead of certainty, including 2 false starts and corrections that showed his thinking. It was still brilliant, still far beyond what should be possible in this time frame. But it looked like genius working in real time, rather than knowledge applied from memory. At 12:43 p.m., Elijah walked his completed proof to the front desk. Every head in the room turned. The proctor's eyes went wide. "You're finished?" "Yes, ma'am." She accepted his papers with trembling hands. Elijah walked out of the room knowing he'd just either won everything or destroyed himself. Possibly both. The finalists' reception was supposed to be a celebration. Faculty mingled with students in an elegant room with catered food and speeches about the future of mathematics. Rankings would be announced at 8 p.m., after the faculty had time to review the final submissions. Elijah stood near the window, holding a plate of food he wasn't eating. Dr. Hartwell approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, may I speak with you privately?" Yes, sir. They walked to an empty classroom down the hall. Hartwell closed the door. Your final submission has been reviewed, and it's correct. The words hung in the air. Completely, rigorously correct. You proved a relationship that 6 faculty members have spent the afternoon attempting to verify, and we cannot find a single flaw. Elijah waited. Hartwell's jaw tightened, which raises obvious questions. How does a 12-year-old with no formal training in advanced number theory solve in under 4 hours what should require years of specialized study? I told you, sir. I solved the Rasmussen conjecture. This problem is part of that proof. That's impossible. You just said my proof is correct. Your proof of this specific relationship is correct. That doesn't mean... Hartwell stopped, pinched the bridge of his nose. Mr. Carter, do you understand what you're claiming? The Rasmussen conjecture has defeated some of the most brilliant mathematicians alive. The idea that you, working alone in a public library, could solve it is what? Impossible because of the math? Or impossible because of who I am? The question landed like a punch. Hartwell's face reddened. That's not what I'm saying. Then look at my work. I have the complete proof. All of it. Let me show you. Even if your solution appears correct at first glance, real proofs require peer review, verification, testing against edge cases that take months to... I'm not asking for publication. I'm asking you to look. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Hartwell spoke quietly. The competition results will be announced in 20 minutes. You'll place first. Congratulations. But afterward, I think it's best if you return home and continue your education at an appropriate pace. Prodigy or not, there's no substitute for proper mentorship and gradual development. You're not going to look at the proof. I'm suggesting that you focus on, you change the final problem. Hartwell froze. Elijah continued, his voice steady. You made it unsolvable on purpose, to stop me from winning, or to make me look like I cheated when I did solve it. Which one? That's a serious accusation. It's a true one. Hartwell's expression shifted. Not anger now, but something colder. Calculation. Mr. Carter, you're an exceptionally talented young man. But talent comes with responsibility. Making inflammatory claims, disrupting academic processes, challenging senior faculty without basis. These behaviors will close doors that might otherwise remain open. I don't want doors that only open if I stay quiet. Then you'll find the world of mathematics very difficult to navigate. They stared at each other across a gulf that had nothing to do with age or knowledge, and everything to do with power. The reception starts in 15 minutes, Hartwell said. I suggest you compose yourself. He left Elijah alone in the empty classroom. Elijah stood at the window, watching students and faculty gather in the reception hall below. His backpack sat on a nearby desk, 12 notebooks inside containing work that could reshape number theory. Work no one would look at, because looking meant admitting possibility. And possibility meant confronting decades of failure, ego, and the comfortable assumption that brilliance could only emerge from the right backgrounds, the right institutions, the right color skin. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. How did it go, baby? I'm so proud of you. Elijah typed a response. Deleted it. Tried again. What could he say? That he'd won but it didn't matter? That he'd proven something extraordinary and been dismissed anyway? He pocketed the phone without responding. Below, faculty were setting up a microphone. The announcement was coming. Elijah picked up his backpack and walked toward the stairs. Not to the reception hall, to the main entrance. He was leaving. Then he heard a voice behind him. Running away? He turned. Dr. Patricia Voss stood in the hallway, arms crossed. I didn't run away from anything, Elijah said. I answered every question, solved every problem. Nobody wants to listen. Hartwell doesn't speak for all of us. He speaks for enough. Voss stepped closer. I voted against changing that final problem. I want you to know that. What they did was wrong. But you didn't stop it. No, I didn't. She looked pained. I should have fought harder. I'm sorry. Elijah adjusted his backpack straps. I appreciate that, but I'm done. Wait. Voss pulled a business card from her pocket. I teach at MIT. If you're willing to share your proof, the complete work on Rasmussen, I'll review it properly, with an open mind and zero preconceptions. Why should I believe that? Because I spent 3 years of my life failing to solve that conjecture. It cost me relationships, sleep, and nearly my career. If someone's actually cracked it, I want to know. I don't care if they're 12 or 70, black or white, from Princeton or from nowhere. I care about the mathematics. Elijah studied her face, searching for the lie. He didn't find one. The reception, he said slowly. They're announcing rankings. They are. And I placed first. You did. What if I didn't accept the award quietly? What if I used that microphone? Voss smiled, tired but genuine. Then I'd suggest you make it count. The reception hall fell silent as Dr. Hartwell stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, faculty and competitors, thank you for 2 extraordinary days of mathematical excellence. This year's National Youth Mathematics Invitational showcased the brightest young minds in the country, and selecting our top finalists was exceptionally difficult. Applause rippled through the room. Elijah stood near the back, backpack still on his shoulders. Third place, Hartwell continued, goes to Jennifer Wang of Phillips Exeter Academy. Applause. Jennifer walked forward, beaming, accepting her medal. Second place, Marcus Chen of the Illinois Mathematics and Science Academy. More applause. Hartwell paused, and something flickered across his face. And first place, with a truly unprecedented performance, goes to Elijah Carter. The applause was polite but confused. Students looked around, not sure where Elijah had come from or why they should be impressed. Elijah walked to the front slowly. He accepted the medal, shook Hartwell's hand, felt the older man's grip. Firm, controlled, warning. Take your win and go home quietly. Elijah turned to the microphone. Hartwell's eyes widened. Mr. Carter, if you'd like to say a few words, I would. Thank you. The room waited. Elijah pulled the first notebook from his backpack and held it up. 2 months ago, I read about the Rasmussen conjecture in a library book. I didn't know it was famous. I didn't know people had spent decades trying to solve it. I just saw a problem that seemed interesting. Confused glances around the room. I worked on it alone. No mentor, no guidance, just notebooks and time. And I found something. A pattern in how prime clusters distribute under specific modular constraints. A relationship that holds across scales. Hartwell stepped toward the microphone. Mr. Carter, this isn't... Elijah kept talking. The final problem today asked us to prove a relationship between prime gaps and density functions. I solved it because I'd already solved it 2 months ago as part of the complete Rasmussen proof. Murmurs erupted. Faculty members exchanged sharp looks. That's an extraordinary claim, someone called from the audience. I know, and I have extraordinary evidence. Elijah opened his notebook to a marked page. This is the central theorem. It shows that prime clusters follow a predictable distribution when viewed through what I call a stepped modular lens. Essentially, you analyze residue classes in progressive magnitude bands, and a pattern emerges that's invisible using traditional approaches. Dr. Voss had moved to the front of the room, squinting at the notebook. The proof, Elijah continued, requires showing this pattern holds under transformation, which means proving the relationship your final problem tested. That's why I could solve it. Not because I'm smarter than everyone here. I'm not. But because I'd already walked this path. Hartwell's face had gone pale. Mr. Carter, making claims in a public forum without proper peer review is... I'm not making claims. I'm offering evidence. Any mathematician in this room can verify what I'm saying. The proof is right here. He held up all 12 notebooks. I came to this competition hoping someone would take me seriously enough to look at my work. Instead, I was laughed at, dismissed, and given a final problem that was designed to be impossible. Except it wasn't impossible to me because I'd already solved the foundation it required. Dead silence. So here's what I'm proposing. Dr. Voss offered to review my complete proof. I'm accepting. And I'm asking that the review be public, not just for professional mathematicians, but documented so everyone can see the process. If my proof is wrong, I want to know where and why. If it's right, he met Hartwell's eyes. If it's right, then maybe we need to rethink our assumptions about who gets to contribute to mathematics. The room erupted. Faculty members surged forward, some demanding to see the notebooks, others protesting the disruption, still others frozen in shock. Dr. Voss reached Elijah first. She took the notebook he offered and flipped through pages, her eyes scanning equations with practiced speed. Her face went slack. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is... you actually..." She looked up at Elijah, and in her expression, he saw what he'd been waiting for all along. Not doubt, not dismissal, recognition. Epilogue. The review took 6 weeks. Dr. Voss assembled a team of 5 mathematicians from different institutions, none of whom had spent their careers pursuing the Rasmussen conjecture. Outsiders who could evaluate the proof without ego investment. They found 3 minor notational inconsistencies and 1 section that required clarification. They found 0 mathematical errors. On January 14th, the team published their preliminary assessment on RxIVie, the open access repository where mathematicians share research before formal publication. The title was simple: Verification of a Novel Proof of the Rasmussen Conjecture. The abstract's final line sent shockwaves through the mathematical world. The proof, developed independently by a 12-year-old student with no formal training in advanced number theory, appears to be correct. Within 24 hours, the paper had been downloaded 40,000 times. Within a week, 3 separate research groups had confirmed the verification. Within a month, the proof was accepted for publication in the Annals of Mathematics, the most prestigious journal in the field. The author line read, Elijah Carter. Elijah's life changed overnight. Interview requests flooded in. News outlets, podcasts, documentary filmmakers all wanting to tell the story of the kid who'd solved the impossible problem. Universities offered scholarships, summer programs, research positions. His face appeared on magazine covers with headlines about genius and perseverance. His mother cried every time someone called their apartment to offer opportunities. Princeton issued a formal statement expressing pride that the conjecture had been solved at their invitational, carefully avoiding any mention of how Elijah had been treated. Dr. Hartwell took a sabbatical and declined all interview requests. But the change that mattered most to Elijah wasn't external. It was the email he received 3 months after the competition from a 14-year-old girl in Atlanta who'd read about his proof. "I thought math wasn't for people like me. But if you can solve something professors couldn't, maybe I can try too. Thank you for showing us we belong here." He read it 5 times, then printed it and pinned it above his desk. 2 years later, at 14, Elijah Carter enrolled at MIT as the youngest student in the university's history. He still lived with his mother during breaks. He still visited Ms. Chen at the library, bringing her updates and thanking her for the table by the window. And when asked by interviewers how he'd solved a problem that defeated the brightest minds in mathematics, his answer never changed. "I didn't see it as impossible. I just saw it as a question that deserved an answer. And I kept working until I found it." The truth was simpler than that, though Elijah rarely said it aloud. He'd been underestimated his entire life. And that had taught him something the professors never learned: that the world's assumptions about what you can't do are just noise. The mathematics doesn't care who you are. It only cares if you're right.